and want to welcome the Minister to the House. Minister, I rise to raise an important issue, which I'm sure you share with me. I have a concern, I think many public representatives have concerns that we are living in a city which is full of effective tinderboxes. I'm talking about fire regulations that we need to strengthen or we need to reflect upon in relation to the safety of buildings that were constructed in the last 20 years, which currently are raising an awful lot of concern for residents, for their representatives. There's a particular difficulty in this, Minister, I'm sure you'll agree with me here, is that when questions are raised about the fire safety of an individual estate or individual house within that estate or an apartment block, there is a reluctance of residents to raise issues around it or to engage in the normal practices of engaging with their local representatives or with the councils or indeed with media, because they're terrified that the value of their properties will then collapse. So they are stuck in the bind of wanting to do something in relation to the fire safety concerns they have about the places in which they live, but worried that the obvious mechanisms that they would normally go through are closed off them because they don't want to hurt the value of their properties. That's completely understandable. So there's two things I want to raise with you, Minister, and I want your reflections on. One is that we're coming to the conclusion that what we need is a dedicated agency where people can make confidential requests or reports about fire safety concerns they have in relation to an issue in their estate that can be dealt with on a confidential basis, so as to bypass this issue that people have about the value of their properties being undermined. Many of these issues can be rectified, they can be fixed without any reputational damage necessarily to the huge investment that people are making. The last thing we need to have is a situation where people are making a determination in their own minds about the value of their property versus the value of their lives and the lives of their families, and basically taking a risk that hopefully this thing will never go on fire because the value and the mortgage that we took out on this thing is so huge and so debilitating to our quality of life that we have to keep have to keep paying money into this mortgage, and that'll actually take the risk on the fire safety. The second thing I want to ask, Minister, is I do know the previous Minister, and this is a cross-governmental thing. This is the thing that's been going on for a number of governments now. So let's bypass all that stuff. But there was a report commissioned by the previous Minister for the Environment after 5 houses in Millfield Manor in Kildare basically went up in fire in less than half an hour. And I understand that report has been completed and the Minister is in ownership of it. So I would like to know what's in that report, what the report contains. This is about the overall standard of fire safety in the country in general. This is something that the local authorities take on board as their responsibility. But from council to council, the resources of councils can change, they can vary, and the responses of councils vary. So I do think it's the responsibility of the Department of Environment to oversee this and to make sure that we have a mechanism in place for people to raise concerns that they have, but also that we conduct an effective audit of all constructions made in the last 20 years when regulations weren't as tightly controlled, of dwellings where people's lives are literally at risk. And we all know, in all of our constituencies and places that we live, of individual apartment blocks which we know are fire hazards, where the risks are there, but the residents are quite literally terrified of raising concerns about it, lest the value of their property collapse. So on that basis, I appreciate your patience in me making my points of view. But it's a very serious issue, Minister. I know you'll appreciate that, and I'd appreciate your response.
Thank you, Senator. Minister.
Thank you, and I'd like to thank the Senator for raising this important issue, and it is a serious issue, as he has outlined in his contribution. The Building Controls Act of 1990 to 2014 set out a clear statutory framework for construction activity. The 1990 Act provides for the making of building regulations and building control regulations to protect the health, safety and welfare of people in and around buildings. The second schedule of the Building Regulations of 1997, as amended, sets out the statutory minimum performance requirements for the construction of new buildings. In particular, Part B of the Buildings Regulations of 1997, as amended, sets out the legal requirements in relation to fire safety in respect of new buildings and in respect of existing buildings undergoing works involving an extension, material alteration or material change of use. The requirements under Part B represent the national statutory minimum standards of fire safety provisions applicable to the construction of new buildings, including dwellings. Under the Building Control Acts of 1990 to 2014, primary responsibility for compliance with the requirements of the building regulations rests with the designers, builders and owners of buildings. Enforcement of the buildings regulations is a matter for the 31 local building control authorities who have extensive powers of inspection and investigation under the Acts. Fire authorities have no powers of inspection in respect of dwelling houses occupied as single dwellings. The Fire Services Act of 1981 to 2003 do, however, apply to premises providing sleeping accommodation, that is, apartments. Furthermore, Section 18(2) of the Fire Services Act places the responsibility for fire safety on the person or persons having control over the premises, which in the case of an apartment block includes the owners and management companies. This is appropriate in a situation where there are some 2 million housing units in the state. In response to building failures that have emerged over the past decade, the Department of Housing, Planning, Community and Local Government introduced the Building Control Amendment Regulations of 2014, which provide for greater accountability in relation to compliance with building regulations in the form of statutory certification of design and construction by registered construction professionals and builders, lodgement of compliance documentation, mandatory inspections during construction and validation and registration of certificates. The Building Control Amendment Regulations of 2014 were reviewed following their first 12 months in operation, and it is clear from the review that the reforms have brought a new order and discipline to bear on construction projects. To complement these reforms, work is at an advanced stage in the Department of Housing, Planning, Community and Local Government in relation to the general scheme of a bill to place the Construction Industry Register of Ireland on a statutory footing and provide in law for the registration of builders. This is seen as an essential consumer protection measure, giving consumers who engage a registered builder the assurance that they are dealing with a competent and compliant operator. In relation to the Senator's two proposals which he outlined in his contribution, the idea of a dedicated agency for making confidential reports, my understanding from the contribution is that this agency would also conduct the audit of these buildings in the past 20 years. I just wanted to get clarity around that. And in relation to the report that's in the Department of the Environment, I haven't had a chance to speak to the Minister about that, but I will ask him the status of that report, when and how it will be made public as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Senator, would you like a supplementary?
Yeah, what's disappointing, Minister, is that I have in my hand here a response to a Dáil question on the 22nd of June 2016 to Deputy Claire Daly, and your response you just read out is effectively a cut and paste job from that. In fact, I was flicking through it here and I could actually read out word for word, sentence for sentence, the reply given from the Department to you to read out here in the Seanad, which basically was the exact same thing read out in June of 2016, effectively a year ago. So, without any disrespect to yourself, Minister, it would appear to me that, more or less, the Department hasn't really moved on very much in a year. Word for word, the same response. What we're talking about here are lives at a risk in apartment blocks and estates across the city and the country, and the capacity of an individual or a residents' association or a collection of individuals or even a public representative to make representations to the central government about the nature of the risk that is there. So yes, we do need a facility, a confidential facility for any group of individuals to make a complaint about a concern that they have, which it will not make lightly. It's not a light thing to say that they think that there's a fire safety issue in their block of apartments or in their estate. To make this confidential request to the department then, yes, would conduct an audit of that individual. But I think there has to be a more robust audit done nationally and not to be dependent on councils, or to demand of councils that they conduct these audits, because otherwise we're going to have continuous individual cases across the country, and we will wait until the fire actually happens, Minister, because the residents are so concerned about the fire safety, but they are constricted by the value of the properties and the reputational damage that they are concerned about. So look, I'm not trying to have a go. I'm not trying to have a political go in terms of the response given to me. I understand what happens here. There's cut and paste jobs done all the time in terms of ministerial responses. But I do feel at this stage we can't wait for somebody for another estate or another apartment block to go on fire. We do actually have some proactive responses needed here. The councils aren't doing it. We have to ensure that the councils are doing it, and we need to have a line of information of confidentiality of nature that groups and individual residents can utilise so that they can get their fire safety concerns rectified.
Thank you, Senator. Minister.
Thank you, and thank you, Senator. And that must be very disappointing if the response is similar to the one that a colleague received a year ago. I don't believe that it's an indication that no work or progress has been made in this area in that time, but nevertheless I will raise it with the Department when I go back to them following the contribution that you've made. I think you're absolutely right that people shouldn't be taking the unacceptable risk of not reporting concerns they have over the conditions in their building because they're worried about that having an impact on the value of the property. So we have to find a way to make sure that people are comfortable reporting risks and making sure that those risks are then dealt with adequately in an appropriate time frame. Because that is essential. I think before we move to the idea of looking at setting up a new agency or a new body, which might be warranted, it requires further study and examination. Let's look at the report that the Minister has already. Let's see what that says. Let's get it published, and then let's go from there.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you, Senator.